Recording in progress.
So Mike and I had our first session of our class earlier today. That was really nice. We started our 10-week course on the centers and pretty good turnout. I think we had, of the 25 students who signed up, 21 or 22 of them made it for the first class, which was great. Some people, the time zone doesn't work, and so they watch it on the replay. Hi, Nancy. I know you were in class earlier. So yeah, it's been and I know you were as well, Christine.
What's the 10th class?
The 10th class? Well, actually there's 11.
Oh,
There's 11. Yeah, I always try to do an extra, it's like in New Orleans, they have something called lagniappe. And lagniappe, which is an English translation of a French word, simply means an extra gift.
nice.
And as a fifth line, I always try to under promise and over deliver, as they say. So we have 9 classes on the centers, which interestingly are not doing one center at a time. They're not.
Okay.
Like we're doing the head and ajna together and so on. And certain centers we're kind of putting in context, like we're doing certain centers twice, but because we're kind of doubling up on them. For instance, the spleen we're talking about in the context of the streams of caring. And then we also have a class on the awareness centers, which will compare the spleen, the ajna, and the solar plexus. And then we're going to do another session on the solar plexus and the streams of sexuality. So we're not really doing a one-to-one, but the first 9 classes are on the centers. The 10th class is the last 2 are both on new perspectives.
Nice.
So I like to do the new perspectives classes at the end. That's something we did for the lines class. And so the 10th class is going to be on the work of Steve Rhodes using his keynoting of the centers. And then the 11th class is on my own original research.
Ooh,
so that's something we did last time
That's
as well.
surprising. I should not.
Hi, Casey. I see you've joined as well. So,
Hello.
hi there. Yeah. So we have a few ideas. I had a couple ideas for what we would talk about today. I'm also pretty open. It was just kind of seeing what's in the air, but one would be talking about the topic you brought up earlier today, Casey, which was the difference between hanging gates in defined centers and how to do keynoting of hanging gates versus dormant gates in undefined centers. Although that term dormant gates, I understand it, but I mean, what is this? Is this saying that a reflector only has dormant gates then? I mean, it is kind of an interesting question of what we mean when we say a gate is dormant. I suppose it's just that it comes out to play when it meets its harmonic. It's not always a fixed characteristic of that person. So that was one topic I thought of. I don't know if that's too dry to sustain a whole session tonight. The other thing is we could also just bring up things that people are interested in. If anyone who's joined does have something they've been learning about lately, questions, things that they're interested in.
I think because it's day 2 of mutation, we should at least, it's gate 1, line 2. We should talk at least a little bit about mutation. And
Let's do it. Let's do it. That sounds great. And we're joined.
All right.
So dark.
Yeah.
The camera's just getting our waists. Here we go. Sorry about that. Well, yeah, let's do that then. That'll be great. So, and also please comment if this microphone is kind of fickle. So I'm trying to do my best to talk into the mic as much as possible. If anyone's too quiet, please speak up and just interrupt and I'll kind of,
I'm into the talking zone.
Yeah, I'll do my best to get people. So we're thinking, they're commenting on having a seasonal beer. We're thinking to do a seasonal human design catalyst, talking about the quarter of mutation. So
And a whole hemisphere. That's something that you never hear anyone refer to, but mutation and initiation together being the whole half of the wheel. So it starts with yang, right? So
It's okay if you don't talk
So-
directly.
so we're not only on the second day of a gate, we're on the second day of a godhead and the second day of a quarter and the second day of a hemisphere of the whole wheel, a whole half of the wheel. This is the second day of it, the day in which yang is, or the hemisphere in which yang is at the bottom of all the hexagrams.
And so,
Starting
yeah,
this year.
and so this is a little bit of a, right, I was gonna say, this is a little bit of a technical point, and so for those who haven't memorized the rave, mandala, what Mike is really talking about is we can divide the wheel. Let me see if I can grab a graphic of it here. We can divide it into quarters, and we can also divide it into halves. And what you're really saying is, now that the sun has entered into gate 1, it's more than just changing quarters. It's like changing halves.
Right. Exactly.
It's kind of interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll pull up a picture of the wheel here so people can see what Mike's talking about.
But I mean, again, no one talks about this. No one refers to these two hemispheres. And you could have an equally valid set of hemispheres if you were to look at duality and mutation together, and initiation and civilization together, because they would share a second line, those two hemispheres. But mutation and initiation are more easily grouped, and also because the order that the hexagrams are in changes at this point. So so basically this is so like boring and dry and structural, but it's true. Like if you start with gate 2, then the order, look at the middle 2 lines of every hexagram starting with gate 2, and they proceed by an order where they're yin yin, yin yang, yang yin, and yang yang. And that continues all the way up until we get to gate 1. And from then on, in all the hexagrams, for the other whole half of the wheel, the order of the middle 2 changes in a different way. It's suddenly yang yang, yang yin, yin yang, yin yin.
Yeah, what Mike is talking about is when you really study the patterns of the chops, that is the patterns of the lines of the hexagrams, it shows that you can not only divide into 16ths or 8ths or quarters, you can actually divide into halves. And the halves divide, the dividing lines are gate 1 and gate 2, which kind of makes sense, but that even the order is inverse.
Right.
This is what you mean when you're saying there's kind of 2 hemispheres of the rave mandala, and hence 2 hemispheres of the year,
Right.
or 2 halves of the year.
I mean, this is the prana of the year. That now we're inhaling for the whole next 6 months. We're inhaling. We've been exhaling for the
This
last
is the-
6 months.
The 6-month hit,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And then
yeah.
the next 6 months. So for you vape kings out there, this is where you start your clocks.
Start holding your breath.
The next 6 months, yeah, we're inhaling, and so the prana of the year, yeah, that is a really poetic way to look at it. The prana of the year begins now.
And
yeah.
inhaling an interiority, especially and mutation tells us what it's about with this first godhead, this godhead of Hades that begins in gate 1. Well, it's not just gate 1. The next preceding gates, 43, 14, and 34, are all individual gates.
And we've talked about godheads before during HD Catalyst, but for those who haven't studied them, the godheads are ways of dividing the wheel into 16 groups of 4, and each 4 gates have something in common. And what they have in common is not always obvious.
Right.
It takes quite a bit of investigative, deconstructive effort to tease out what they have in common. So just as an example, gate 1, which we're in now, and then for the next almost month, we're in this godhead of Hades, 43, 14, and 34.
Oh, we just moved on from all the splenic gates.
Right.
Yeah, the comment from Ashley is that we just moved on from all of the splenic gates. Yeah, and so now that we're in Hades, which is kind of announced with gate 1, the fully yang gate, all 6 lines of it are yang. Now we are in a theme, and how Mike is characterizing this theme is the beginning of interiority, of inward. but also we know that we're at the beginning of mutation. So there are 4 quarters, right? That's something else we've kind of been, talking about, and we've done previous sessions on the quarters. But if you're not familiar with them, essentially 4 groups of 8 gates each, and each of these 8 gates have something in common. What they technically have in common is that the bottom 2 lines are the same. So if you study this wheel, you'll see that the bottom 2 lines are yin yin for a full quarter, for the quarter of civilization. And then it goes to yin yang for the quarter of duality. Now we're in yang yang, the quarter of mutation. Then it goes to yang yin, the quarter of initiation.
And that these seasons change in the exact middle of the secular seasons. So in the exact middle between the start of fall and the start of winter is where we are now.
Yeah, they change at the classical, I guess you would call them the classical pagan holidays of there's actually a technical name for it, but
This one-
the mid seasons, yeah.
This one is Samhain.
Samhain, right. Samhain.
Right.
Yeah, right. Samhain, spelled kind of like Sam Hain, but pronounced Samhain, is the traditional pagan holiday that's the exact midpoint between fall and winter.
I found out that's also just the Gaelic word for November, which
Yeah.
makes sense.
Okay, yeah. So all this to say that there are different ways of kind of analyzing the wheel, and it's very rewarding to study the wheel and to learn about the wheel in different ways. Maybe for a moment, I'll just talk a little bit about Hades, because that's one of the godheads I actually know a little more about. And it's interesting too, when you start to study the wheel and start to study certain times of year, you'll just become very familiar with those gates, and you'll be like, this again. You kind of get a little bit of recognition about that time of year. So Hades is an interesting godhead in that traditionally the god of death. And it's beginning the quarter of mutation, which is purpose fulfilled through, is it transition? Transformation, right. And so purpose fulfilled through transformation. What it also tells you is just something as generic and fundamental as what quarter you're born in says something about your life purpose for this life.
Huge.
Yeah. Now that's not your overall purpose through many different incarnations. It's just this incarnation. So maybe last life you came in on civilization and you were here to build. And then the life before that you came in on duality and you were here to fulfill your purpose through bonding and through relationship. Or you came in on initiation and your purpose was fulfilled through your mind, like Ra. He could fulfill his purpose in presenting the human design system and structuring that system using his mind. But then say this time you come in and you're in mutation. And this is true for 25% of the people out there. Then your purpose is fulfilled through transformation, which is really saying that death is such an integral part of the program that a good 25% of people out there are there to make sure that process goes smoothly,
Right.
to make sure to help people prepare for death, to help people prepare for transformation, which, as you've pointed out, is not only literal death, although that is a big part of it, but it's all of the little deaths on the way up. And I don't mean le petit mort in that sense.
Not just coming and dying, but other stuff.
Okay.
So what is the distribution here? You're duality, I'm a mutation. What are you guys? Duality?
Not sure.
What's your sign?
Aries.
Aries?
So probably
That must be
initiation.
initiation.
So we have an initiation, 2 dualities, and a
Sweet.
mutation.
Lovely.
No civilization here.
Yeah.
Okay. And of course, you can see where you are on the wheel, and you can see what quarter you're in. If you notice the G center gates, the gates of the Sphinx, so 2, 7, 1, and 13. And you'll notice that they divide the wheel equally. 2 in Taurus in the bottom left there. 7 and Leo in the bottom right.
I think it's interesting that the only signs that span 2 quarters are also the signs that sum up one of the quarters. So Scorpio is so mutation, but it's the only, it's only halfway in mutation. Huh?
Yeah, he was just
Oh, yay, Johnny.
he was like a kitty cat looking in the window, like, can I come in?
Sing this music now I'm here.
And this is a Virgo, so we have another duality.
Yeah, 3 dualities.
a duality.
You're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Bonding.
There's chairs back there.
Perfection through relationship.
Perfection through relationship, Ashley says. Okay, so you were saying about Scorpio spanning.
Yes, so Scorpio inaugurates mutation, but then it also is among the traditional zodiacal signs, whatever, it's the best representation of mutation. And then Aquarius, best representation of initiation and the principle of mind, and Taurus, best representation of building the Maya and all that, and being.
But is Leo really the best representation of duality?
Maybe that one's a little weird. Yeah. Well,
I just say this as a Libra, but
there's okay. How
Hey,
about
that's
this?
messed up.
How about this? The most dramatic other is when someone's on stage. Then there's really an audience and really a performer. How much more other can you get than that? The spotlight on you is pretty fucking Leo.
It's all about leadership, man. That's what Leos are about.
Yeah.
well, but we're saying
It's all
that,
about
I mean,
the other.
but does it, well, you can say leadership,
But you're right.
I don't think leadership is all about the other, because if I think about duality, I would tend to think Libra or,
when
the seventh
Libra is the
house.
classic, the other.
the
That's true.
descendant. If you think of first house
So-
as the ascendant,
So that's the exception.
Yeah.
That's the exception.
where Leo is the 5th house, which is more about personal creative expression and the creativity. But yeah, I see the point. The inner child, says Ashley. Sometimes the outer child as well. But
And just another dichotomy that I wanted to throw in there to just sort of cohere all this is this intensity and extensity, because we were talking about the prana earlier. I think that's that. Yeah, put that in the other room, or if you will.
please continue.
So the inhalation and the exhalation, the intensity of yang as a base. Yang is intense. Yin is form. Yin is extent. It is the extensity of things, that things have a form, that they have a mass, that they have a reach, that they have an elaboration, that there's an exhalation to them. Is yin.
Yeah, I've heard that used both ways, and I appreciate that way of looking at it, because it does certainly make sense from one level. For instance, if you look at the Chinese philosophical perspective, where the fully yang, gate 1, which we're in now, is called heaven, which would then be fully spirit, I guess you could say, and then the fully yin being earth.
Yeah.
So, and from that perspective, there's an extension of earth, or the visible, the material. However, in traditional Chinese philosophy, it's actually the yin lines that are invisible, and the yang is visible. And so there's a really beautiful example of this when you look at the trigrams for fire and water. And let me see if I can find this for people. Trigram fire. So let's see if we have it. Yeah. So this is fire right here, this trigram of fire. And you can see that it's yang, yin, yang. And traditionally, this is actually the characteristic of fire here would be that it's only visible, but it has no interiority. The same way that a flame creates a big image, but you can put your hand right through it. Now compare. Let's see here. Oops. Water. Yeah, sorry. Thank you for bearing with me here. Now, this is the trigram of water, and you can see it's yin, yang, yin.
You can see through it, but it's
you can see through it, but if you put your hand through it, there's something
resistance.
there.
Yeah.
And so but I mean, it is interesting also that what is resistant is the yang line, of course. But yeah, I still see your point. Your point is that this yin time of year is the turning inward time.
Well, yeah.
Of intensity, inner sense of. Right.
Yeah. And pure yin is almost like matter without form, right? It's like that the idea that there's an the demarcation of an extent weirdly is yang. The idea of extensity, or that there is a matrix from which to draw, That is pure yen. So it's
Yeah.
matter without form. We can't even imagine it, nor could we imagine pure quality without some sort of material.
Well, and it makes sense that when we're looking at the quarters of the wheel, the quarter of civilization, which is the most material, the most physical, is yin. So, well, I wanted to talk just a little bit about the godhead of Hades. Do we have anyone who's a 1, a 43, a 14,
The
a 34?
reflector.
Any birthdays?
The reflector on the Discord is.
Oh yeah, she's not
what's
here right
her
now.
name?
And if
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's just her birthday. So yeah, she's not on here right now. But okay, well, so what does it mean, excuse me, to have this godhead of Hades, and how does it relate to mutation? Now, if we see the program as essentially everything that is necessary for the smooth functioning of the development of human consciousness, how does human consciousness develop? Well, it cannot continue to develop without death. At this point in the development of consciousness, it's an incarnative process, and there's also decarnation, there's also death. And in fact, when you look at base theory and you look at base 2, which is the base of mind, you see that the mind is kind of like a CDR, not an RW. The rewritability of the mind only goes so far. We actually learn, and it's incredibly difficult to unlearn. We start this life with bottom-up processing, and we begin to get more and more top-down processing that, despite our best efforts to continue to learn and grow and change, eventually the neuroplasticity of the mind, it doesn't remain as plastic as we would wish. And we have eventually learned, and there's sort of a winning out of the inertia of the top-down processing, the assumptions that we make about life and what we've already learned, so that by a certain age, we're here to transmit what we've learned and not necessarily to learn anew. And I mean, this is only so far, because obviously the potential of the nine-centered being is to continue learning up until age 84. So I'm not trying to say here that we stop learning at a certain point, because there's always this incredible neuroplasticity of the mind that can allow us to continue to grow and learn and change. But at a certain point in the 80s, the 90s, we really do change, right? I mean, there is a shift. We are Uranian forms. And while it's not the same as the seven-centered form that reached its potential around the Saturn return, there's still a potential. And so because of that, the development of consciousness necessarily takes into account death. And it necessarily takes into account that the old will die so the young can live. The other interesting thing is, when you look at it from the perspective of consciousness, young and old are switched. The people that were born longer ago were born from a younger consciousness. So the maturation of consciousness as a whole is such that people being born today are being born from an older, more mature, more developed strain of consciousness.
You used to say this before human design.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is really the perspective that Carl Jung gives us with the collective unconscious, which is that from our own perspective as an individual, things that happened in the past were very old. But from the perspective of the collective unconscious, things that happened in the past were when it was very young. And it is growing older always. So looking at it from the perspective of a maturational process of the development of consciousness, the same consciousness continues to develop through this iterative process of people being born, living, and dying, and then being born, living, and dying. And we actually know from human design and from Ra's encounter with the voice that incarnation is a process where the personality crystal is reused. In other words, there is an eternal soul or eternal life that's been here since the Big Bang and does continue on. Although, of course, there's no self-reflected consciousness without the being to house that. But this is just to say that as we enter into this quarter of mutation, we're entering into the time where the program is now essentially giving the necessary components for death to occur smoothly, not kicking and screaming, but but in a smooth operation, as if the whole thing is a roller coaster or a various rides. And how do you design it so that people stand in line, they get on the ride? Well, they eventually have to get off the ride too. You don't want them to be holding on to their seat and refusing to get off. So how do you convince them to get off, right? And that's part of what this quarter is about. Any comments so far? Anything?
Again, the death and interiority, and the other real ingredient to me is solitude, being alone, loneliness and aloneness in the quarter of mutation, and that it begins with 4 individual gates. And I had been looking at Minerva as also sort of preparing us for this. And Ashley, you brought up that it's 7 splenic gates in a row before we get here. So it is sort of doing checks and balances throughout the physical form to see if there's continuity there or not. Isn't that funny? It's like spleen, and then death season, right?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
thinking recently too, like
Sure.
the splenic season, we have this thing with a Halloween season being about fear and wanting, like, we enjoy the fear of it. Like, people get really into scary movies and scary costumes and stuff. I almost see it as like this way of getting out of our system through the programming all this like surface level fear, so that once we get to the mutation quarter, we can like really go forward in that yang sort of way and do what we need to do, express ourselves, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah, each step in the wheel is really preparing us. It's putting the final touches on the last step, and then preparing us for the next, and so on. And it is funny even just to look at the 4 gates of the cross of the 4 ways, because those are the 8th gate of each set of 8. So each quarter ends with one of the 4 ways. And so at the end of civilization, you have retreat. The busiest time of year, let's now retreat and go into withdrawal so that we can kind of have a respite from that. Well, we just finished the quarter of duality after all this bonding. Now we have coming to meet, where we just left, right? Gate 44. And the fear of extinction and things like that. So yeah, just talking a little bit about Hades. I was just kind of give a hint as to how you might deconstruct the Godheads if you feel drawn to study the wheel in this depth. So we know that Hades is gates 1, 43, 14, and 34. And we know that Hades is the god of death, but it also was known as riches and wealth, and was actually associated historically with treasure. And there are many interesting connections you can make here. The post-Jungian archetypal psychologist James Hillman in Dream and the Underworld really wrote an entire book about the Hades archetype and about death and about Pluto and its connection to riches and the ways we can understand this as the riches held by the unconscious and things like that. But also he's very critical of the sort of Western capitalistic, let's plunder the riches, he wouldn't be content to have such a simple narrative as you go inward to get the inner gold.
Right.
He didn't like that.
My immediate association is the grain growing from the tomb of Osiris or whatever, the corpse of the dying god or whatever being the bed of so much life.
Yeah, and it is part of it that the life requires death. Excuse me. But we have to think about let's just look at these 4 gates now. And I'm kind of cheating because I've heard Ra's lectures here, and it's really wonderful to hear Ra weave together gates that don't seem to have a lot to do with each other, and what the connection is between these things.
In this case, it's rare for them to have so much to do with each other, obviously, in the sense that they're all individual. That hardly ever happens. And what's interesting too is that it's Hades and it's Maya. So for twice a year, both Sun and Earth are only in individual gates.
I see what you're saying, because right, the opposite, 1 and 2 are both individual, 43, 23, 14, 8, and then 20 and 34. Yeah, that's a really good point, that both Hades and Maya are purely individual. So yeah, there's definitely some interesting things to tease out there. But even still, it's not so obvious what they have to do with each other. But I'll just give you an example of how you might weave the keynoting in the style of Ra. So for one thing, with gate one, we know as the creative. And so this reminds me of something Deleuze said in his great lecture. It's on YouTube. What is the creative act? So if you're interested in a little philosophy, look at Gilles Deleuze, What is the Creative Act? And he talks a lot about art and about having ideas and the mediums for these ideas and how we express ourselves and what is the creative act. That's his whole talk. But at the end, he says something really profound. He says, art resists. And what it resists, I mean, he actually even gets to a really beautiful point, which is kind of beside the point here. It ultimately, he actually claims, resists the separation of the sacred and the profane, which is a really beautiful idea, that people always try to say this is sacred and that's profane, and that the good artist is the one who consternates those critics who try to keep them apart, or those popes who try to keep them apart, right? But he actually, when he talks about resistance, he says, well, yeah, it can be political resistance, it can be an act of resistance to conformity, right? It's this individual resistance to being told to be the same as others. But ultimately, also, it resists death. And all we need to do is look at cave paintings from 30,000 years ago to see that art is what resists death. That in fact, we can see with gate one, once you have expressed your creativity, you can die easy. You can die happy, right? You've expressed yourself. It's not that you're on your deathbed going, I had so much to express, but I was never able to get the creativity out. And then we go to gate 43. Now this one, it takes a little more deconstructive effort. We know that 43, well, there's an interesting thing that Ra points out here already, which is he loves to say that knowledge is not power, not for the nine-centered being. However, he also points out that both knowledge and power are in Hades. Gate 43 being a gate of knowing, and the I know, connected to its 23, which is always the voice of I know. And then gate 34, which is the gate of power. So we do have an interesting connection.
And isn't 14 called doesn't that have something to do with power?
Possession in great measure, yeah. And so it's also it's not
That's
so
about it,
but so we'll get to that in a moment. So with 43 being about efficiency, though, knowing how to make things more efficient. If you look at these cross of explanation people on gate 43, where they're endlessly bitter about the lack of recognition for how their efficiency would improve things. I mean, if you think 1858 wants to improve things, look at a 4323. They want to improve things in a way that only they know and nobody else knows. And there's nothing logical about it. It's just this is more efficient, right? In fact, Ra himself was a 4323 channel of structuring, and he was so proud that he could make his breakfast and eat it and wash the dishes in 10 minutes flat. All of it all together. He had it timed perfectly, right when the toast pops up and he gets his coffee out from the thing and flips the egg, and all of it was just dialed in. He saved 20 minutes a day. No one else was that impressed, right? He was so proud of his efficiency in that department. But it's interesting because we can see that with gate 43 being about efficiency, it tells us something, that the program, as soon as we've made it, as soon as we've bonded, duality's over, we've made our babies. Now it's about being as efficient as possible all the way into the grave. The more efficient you are, the faster the days go by.
Nice.
Scientists have already shown if you do the same thing every day, it all blends together into one day. So you live 40 years and it's like you lived 1 year and then you're done, So let's be as efficient as possible all the way into the grave. That's what 43 is about in that sense. Now 14, that is all about, that is the wagon overflowing with riches. And it's so interesting to see 14 not being tribal, and yet a lot of 14s I know, and a lot of 214s with that whole channel, who are really some of the most supportive people, even though support is not an individual keynote. they're supporting who's personal to them, who's personally close to them. People mix up individual circuitry and think that it's self-centered or survivalist or something. That's a little more like integration circuitry. Personal is a better way of thinking of it. If they personally like you, they'll do anything for you. If they are personally connected to you, and it's like, why did you do that? It's personal. You wouldn't get it. You wouldn't understand why I did that. How come you? Yeah.
That's the thing about it is like, is integration is like empowerment for yourself. Like the other doesn't exist, but then individual is like, there's always the other there. Like you're there to mutate some other,
Right.
you know.
It's,
There's always
it's
other
your
integration.
other, the other that's
Right.
personal.
It's your other, and it's like, why do you like this one and not that one? I don't know. It's none of your business. That's the individual. Back off. That's none of your business why I like them.
Yeah.
Who said I like them? Mind your own business. You know, it's very empowered.
It's personal.
It's very personal. Yeah, it's very personal. So, yeah, so with that 14, I mean, we can see also that this is about accumulating wealth. And so what happens? How do you prepare to die? You accumulate wealth. Therefore, it's very easy for you. The days pass quickly because you have this accumulation of wealth that allows you to efficiently spend your days to the grave. And then finally, we have 34, which is also about power, the accumulation and retention of power.
Is 14 called power skills, or am I thinking of something else?
Yeah, well, it's that's a channel, but yeah, 14 does. Yeah, we can look at keynotes.
Because that would be crazy if 2 gates in a row both had power in them.
Oh no, they're both about power for sure.
Crazy.
Let's go.
20 is also about power.
I think 14 might be
14.
called power skills. There's some gate that goes.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, power skills, gate 14.
And it's funny that that 14 line one is money isn't everything.
Yeah.
So it's like
That's the
accumulate
foundation.
a whole bunch of money,
Yeah.
but there's money isn't everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, the gate of power skills.
Money is just means to access, right? Because 14.2 is all about like pointing out the resources that are available to you, and money gets wrapped up in that so easily. But it's
Well, and right, and as the not self, it's the delusion you can throw money at problems,
Mm.
and it's saying that energy alone can never be the key.
right.
So that is something to remember. So, all right. Well, any comments, questions, ideas? Anyone having? I always love to hear what you have to say, Nancy. If you feel like contributing anything about this, I see there's a chat here. Casey says Godheads irritate her. A bunch of religious figures are making puppets of us. And we have to break covenants with them. Seems ridiculous. And more like it's a stretch of Ra's attempts to get people free from religious thinking that tends to lend itself to more religious thinking. Well, I mean, I don't think he was attempting to get people free from religious thinking. He was more showing how hard to escape the program it is. And it's kind of this funny thing where when you get to the yin, there is no disagreement, that all disagreement is fundamentally disagreement between one of these 16 fundamental positions you can take. So a philosopher, Schopenhauer comes out with World as Will, and, he comes out with his masterpiece, his magnum opus. Well, all he's really doing is espousing that one of the 16 fundamental opinions is the only true one.
Right.
And then 15 other philosophers come out of the woodwork and they all argue with, Schopenhauer. Oh, I see your comment there as well, Asita. Thank you. Yeah. 14, the gate of power skills. Yeah. And so I think that's what it really is that there are just these fundamental perspectives and they're always going to be at odds with each other. And they are all kind of sending their avatars out to try to totalize that viewpoint and to compete with each other. It's really showing how the world is not stable, but it's metastable. And what metastability means is that there are certain processes in place that are self-healing processes, like the ocean gets too much alkaline and then it starts to produce more acid to compensate, or it gets too acidified and then new microbes come along that eat the acid and produce alkaline. There are all of these processes in place where the metastability of the world is not harmonious, it's through antagonism.
Right.
But that the antagonisms together create a meta harmony in some sense, such that each Godhead represents one agenda.
Mhm.
and these 16 conflicting, competing agendas are always fighting with each other.
Mm.
And yet, through their fighting with each other, there is some sort of, there's never an emergent victor. It's never one of the 16, although I guess keepers of the keys, we were always joking, kind of
Oh,
gets to pick the victor in some sense. But it's not exactly the case, at least for that time. It's like, you get a gold medal for this part of the round.
Right.
You know.
It just it wants to keep
It wants to keep it going,
Yeah,
to
yeah.
keep the game going.
Yeah.
So every now and then the underdog gets a leg up, and every now and then and so on. But yeah, I mean, it's really this interesting perspective of the Maya as these 16 competing factions. And I think when Ra says break the covenant with the gods, what he's really saying is be yourself, do what you came here to do. Yes, they clothed you, but you don't owe your life to your tailor.
Mm. True.
Yeah. Well, any comments here? Anything on the Godheads, anything at all? I know this was kind of an unplanned, well, I guess you had some intimation of talking about this, just as a, I feel like Mike is always doing like, you know, wheel, you're kind of here to be, maybe this is keepers of the wheel. This is part of your wheel awareness.
Yeah,
Let's
wheel
be
awareness.
aware.
Yeah, that's true.
Remember, guys, we just entered into gate one.
Yeah.
We're in a new quarter now. Remember,
Yeah, I feel them. I feel these more strongly than the seasons now, you know.
yeah. Well, I definitely feel the change of the wheel that is the midpoint of the classic seasons.
The other G center gates.
Yeah,
The ones that you're
yeah, I
playing.
know it's definitely those to me are really the peaks. Like summer solstice to me is the peak of
Yeah,
summer, not
truly.
the beginning of summer.
Yeah.
And
That's where the
those-
love is. The love is in the middle of the vessel, right? There's
Yeah.
there's a quarter, and in the middle of the quarter, that's where the love grows.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. I love that. Well, this was quite a technical one today. I know that we didn't really talk much about personal connections to the body graph or anything, but it is one of the great gifts that we've all received in this knowledge, which is the wheel. And so the more you learn the wheel and the more you kind of deconstruct different parts of the wheel, you can really get so much out of that. It is very rewarding, and it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving because it is so inscrutable and at first seems insurmountable even. And how do we approach these 64 binary codes we've been given? And yet over time and with effort, and it helps if your Godhead is the keepers of the wheel. For some reason,
Then you have to keep that.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of keepers of the wheel, I somehow always think of the crypt keeper. Maybe it's just the name keeper.
Yeah.
I just think,
Well, I associate crones with the keepers of the wheel, the old the fates and the gray at their spinning wheel or whatever, the threads of fate and whatnot.
Casey says that the eclipse pressure released today, so maybe some correlation. Yeah, well, I think a lot of pressure released
Wow.
going into gate one. I mean, I definitely have the sense that we're in a new season.
Definitely.
It really does feel like the first day of winter or the peak of fall, I guess. Peak fall vibes. But technically, winter doesn't begin until the solstice, right?
Mm-hmm.
So funny. Yeah. Yeah. I always like, Mike had some really good, analysis of the winter solstice, which is that it's gate one. Sorry, not gate one. We're in gate one now. Gate 10, rather. And that gate 10 is about self-love and how it's the darkest night of the year is the night of self-love in a way. It's like when you're most turning inward, you're at the innermost of the innermost, you're face to face with yourself. Like if there's one night of the year that is the dark night of the soul of the year, it's got to be gate 10.
Oh.
It's got to be winter solstice because it's like you can't do anything else. You're just turning inward, especially if it's a new moon, actually. I'll say.
And you're outside the most on 15, seeing the extremes and all of what humanity has to offer. You're most likely to party hop on the solstice, because there's that much daylight to play with.
Yeah, summer solstice has always been my tradition for summer solstice with gate 15 was always going to the Fremont solstice parade, where you really see the diversity of the human experiential way.
Totally.
There's like naked bicyclists and all sorts of crazy festival things and you're party hopping all around and it doesn't get dark till 9 p.m. because you're up in
Oh, they
Seattle.
literally reversed in the summer solstice, it's 15. and
Summer
then
solstice
winter
is 15 and winter is 10.
Paired, right?
Exactly. Yeah, they're the oppositions. Yeah, exactly. So yeah.
I feel like this is a little bit northern hemisphere centric, because like the shortest day of the year in the southern hemisphere is going to be what the fifth one line. Yeah, gate 15 is. So how do they experience the shortest of the year with gate 15?
But what percentage of the world population is in the southern hemisphere?
Oh, probably like 20% or something like that.
9%.
9%.
Yeah. But even if it is 20%, it's still relevant to kind of, there are no coincidences in the sense that because people can also say it's Eurocentric or it's Western centric or it's this or it's that centric, not just Northern Hemisphere centric. But what it really is that there is an 80-20 rule to the world where 80% of something is going to kind of go to one side and 20% to the other. And the side that is the majority, 80%, is going to sort of dictate the overall theme. So in some sense, it's kind of, yes, you're right. And the Southern Hemisphere is determined in its symbolism in relation to the Northern Hemisphere because I guess it's 91% of the world population.
The disproportionate. Yeah. And everything has to contain its opposite. It's always a binary.
Right. And there will always be an exception, but there's that saying, the exception proves the rule. What it means is not the exception invalidates the rule. People sometimes get that wrong and they say, well, that's an exception or it's all exceptions. Yeah. But what it really is saying is that the rule is the 80 and the exception is the 20. And I always liked 80-20 rules. I always liked this Pareto principle, it's called. But it wasn't until studying base theory that I started to see everything in 80-20s. Because base, of course, is a division by 5. And 80-20, well, 20% is 1/5. So it is an interesting fact that, if 80% of women give birth, 20% of mothers give birth to 80% of children, or 20% of customers provide 80% of revenue, or 20% of, and so on. You kind of have these rules across the board. And if you look up the Pareto principle, you can find these big lists of all the 80-20 rules. And it's really incredible. It kind of shows that that's a fundamental of the Maya. And it really validates base theory as this fundamental divisions that build the Maya. There was a period where I was really enjoying seeing everything in terms of base, and then I kind of thought back to what Ra had said, where he spent 6 months with base, where he kind of had to set it down because it's easy to go mad with base, because you can start to see everything as basically coded in this way. Like as a computer programmer, if I were to build something, now I know how I'd build the Maya. I kind of got the key to it when I studied Ra's base materials, because what he was saying is everything. We could take a genre of music, we could take anything at all, is going to be some combination of these 5 fundamental building blocks. And it's either going to be 5 parts base 1, or 4 parts base 1 and 1 part base 2, or 3 parts base 1, 1 part base 2, 1 part base 3. Or it's going to be a combination of base 1 and 3, or a combination of base 2 and 5, any possible permutation, any possible combination. Right. And then you can start to see like, oh, blues music is a combination of base 2 and 3. Jazz is more base 1 and 2. Right. Techno music is pure base 1 if it's just pure minimal techno, or it's pure base 2 if it's, and so on. And of course, Enya is pure base 5.
Yeah,
little bass joke from the others. Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, they're probably like base 4 and base 5 because they have a little darkness in there.
Any atmospheric ambient furniture music. So base 5.
Atmospheric ambient furniture music. But then some of it's pure base 5, some of it's like 4 parts base 5 and 1 part base 1 or something. They have a crazy solo, or they have a. So yeah. Anyway, for those who haven't studied bass, this will sound like gibberish. But
one other trivia about Venus being the standard and tracing a 5-petaled flower as its orbit. This Venus and
that Venus. If you look at it, its intersections of its orbit with ours, there's a really interesting, or basically its intersections with the ecliptic make a 5-petaled flower.
Right. The standard is 5.
Oh,
5 is normal. Yeah.
That's the actual this doesn't have standard on here. See, this is one. This is something Mike made, which is great. I mean,
But the intersection of foundation
the
and
magic square.
and tribe is Venus, right? Is the standard.
Yeah.
Or heart or whatever. Heart and foundation.
Right. Heart, the heart row and the foundation column together make the standard.
The standard.
And you were saying there's a fiveness to Venus, and so
Yeah.
for our plane at least, 5 is the standard. Well, we've gone quite far afield today.
Fun.
This is great. We have really delved into the mystery.
What? Oh yeah, whoa, that's crazy.
Johnny said V is 5 for Roman numerals. So V for Venus. Wow.
Numerology, I thought like 6 was the harmonious number,
She's saying in numerology, 6 is the number of harmony.
which is like.
Well,
spare
I don't think we
Venusian,
should ask what it, right, and is 6 related to Venus? I mean, I think asking which number really relates to which planet won't get us as far as just
the
what,
actual structures of it.
or also just what use is there in different numerological systems?
Yeah.
Right, like, yeah, do we want to, I mean, obviously, in the tarot for the ancient Chaldeans, 6 was the number of Venus. 6 is lovers, 15, which is also a 6, is the devil, which is the octave of the lovers. And both of them were said to be of the quality of Venus. If you look at the Chaldean numerology and the Chaldean tablets, which were the basis of the tarot. So yeah, I mean, there are going to be different associations. But I think it's really just about communication and kind of what we mean by these things, and if we're able to glean insights from them. Numerological insights are famously mercurial.
Ancient versus like what we observe in nature.
Yeah, it's also ancient versus what we observe. And that's a good point that, right, the ancients may have had a very different quality for Mars being a bloodthirsty planet compared to, in human design, we understand Mars as a planet of mutation. And there's that great quote from Ra where he was talking about how the Maya works and saying, we act as if we are only conditioned by the planets. But in fact, if everyone said Mars is the planet of medicine and of good health, we would be conditioning Mars, and then it would then condition us in turn from that perspective. So it is kind of one of those weird intertextual, intersubjective things where it's like the question, what makes a good artist? Well, other artists say they're a good artist. Well, what makes them good artists? Well, other artists say that they're good artists too. And so we have this sort of systems effect or emergent effect in the Maya, where there is no canonical authority, and yet something emerges.
We make it by what we say, so we keep saying things about it, and then that's becomes what it is and how it functions.
Yeah,
It's funny that we use the 5125 in Wa, 5125 being the the consecrator of this, whether it's the status of a good drawer or that Mars means this, or that this is a magic stick or whatever. The 5125 does that, and we have that in Wa. So we have that in the culture branding, the imprinting. It's we don't need every individual to think that Mars is the planet of medicine to change it. We just need enough laws to do it.
Yeah, we just need a rebrand. Time to rebrand Mars. Mars is really a tired brand. Fighter, come on, we don't need this warrior. It's time for a rebrand. Let's get our marketing department to start putting out ads, and then if we have enough WAs that believe it, yeah. I would like to do more sessions on Wa and on Penta. Those are both really fascinating topics, and very different, by the way. That Penta is still personal in some sense, even if it is impersonal. We feel it as personal because it's our families and it's these dynamics that we've grown up in, and there's a lot of dysfunction there. And then Wa, it's almost like conspiracy theory. You really start to see. And for those who we haven't talked about this before, Penta, like we're in a Penta, actually we're in a single Penta right now.
A nice
there are 5 of us.
Yeah.
So we're in one group. And as soon as a 6th person comes, they would sort of be kicked out, or they would bifurcate the group or something like that. Wa is very different in that Wa is not really a transauric form. It's a programming matrix that exists in larger groups where you have more than a couple pentas. I guess the minimum, I guess you need 3 as minimum. I always think that Wa really emerges with 16, but Mark Germain was saying you need 9 for a Wa. 3 pentas. It certainly feels qualitatively different when you get 15 or 16 people. Say you're at a party, 9 people still feels like role confusion over penta.
Definitely.
Like when there's 9 people, I literally want to give people red and blue badges and be like, this is your team and we're going to compete.
Yeah.
Because if we don't, there's going to be role confusion and we're just going to all be in this weird, awkward situation. But as soon as you get 15 or 16 people, you start to get Wa dynamics emerge, and you start to feel a little more invisible. You start to feel like, someone else will deal with that. You start to get bystander effect. You start to feel like, this is a party. What's going on here? Like there's a stranger here. There might
Something else.
There might be a predator here. We don't even know. I mean, I better, put away my purse or my, wallet, because as soon as you get to Wa, you kind of are confronted with this other thing. And it's not even that it's a transauric form. It's really a programming matrix that we start to have different biochemistry, that different things in our body actually begin to occur.
Right.
That harken back to ancient mating rituals. I mean, people get more sexually aroused in a Wa. I mean, it literally produces, yes, it literally, like if you want to go on a date, take somebody out to a movie to be in a big Wa, or take them out to, a concert and you're in a Wa. Haven't you ever been in a concert and like seen somebody across the room and you just lock eyes and it's.
Brayden once said something weird that like quad rights can break up a Wa or penta because they're non-strategic or something.
The comment is that Brayden once said, I love things that start. I love things that start with Brayden once.
Yeah.
So Brayden once said that quad rights can break up a Wa. I don't know what break up a Wa would even mean, because the thing is, the penta can be broken up, but the Wa itself is not really.
I think that's something to do with the
form.
non-strategicness.
It's
I think
not
it's
that
probably
it's
just getting
non-strategic. Yeah, I would like to get into Brayton's brain for a moment to see what that's about. But since he's not here,
Well, why would the Wa be strategic if it's not interested in its own survival as a penta is? I mean,
yeah, right. The Wa is not interested in its own
It's just
survival
like
because it's not a transauric form
it's
in
not
the
a
way
creature.
that
Yeah.
it's not a creature, it's not a critter in the way
Yeah.
that the penta is. Like the penta is actually the closest thing to aliens that we really have.
Right.
That was Ra's joke was, if you want to see aliens, look no further than your own family, because at the moment 3 of you or more are in a room together, you have penta dynamics, and the penta is something bigger than you that is fighting for survival of that group and fighting to stay together. It's kind of like when you go back to see years later and your aunt pulls out a photo. This is you when you were 4 years old. It's like, this is the proof that we were a family. Don't ever forget that you are part of us. Like we are part of this thing. We will survive. It's still fighting for survival. But the Wa is different. It's a programming field. And it's there to program us into certain fundamental roles. It's very Lord of the Flies. The moment you have a survival situation and you have 15 people there, you're going to have a leader, and they're going to have someone. And
Could you say like group forums like Reddit or Twitter, X or whatever? Are those Was?
the question in our group forums was no, because I guess there's probably certain Wa dynamics at work, but no, it's more like your biology actually changes when you're in a group with a large enough group. It's like bystander effect. Like you could be on Twitter and then you see something happen outside, you're like, oh my god, you call the cops. But if you're in a group with 20 people and see that exact same thing happen, you're like, oh my god, somebody called the cops. It's a very different psychological dynamic that just kind of assumes that because so many people are there that somebody else is already dealing with it, or assumes that somebody's a leader or somebody's in charge, things like that. And there are other interesting things we can go in, and we can definitely do a future session on Wa, because there's a lot of fun in looking at the different roles. They very much are the archetypes of every survival movie you've ever seen, Lost or something, where you have the leader and they have a hitman, and you have the priest, and you have all of the different, you have the soldier, you have all the different archetypes, and invariably there's a predator in the Wa. Invariably there's someone trying to take advantage of that situation. So every great survival story that kind of hits all of the marks has to have the character you're suspicious of.
Mhm.
You're not quite sure. Are they just going to take advantage of that situation? Are they going to steal that, water supply? Are they going to take more rations? It's very, all those classic Hitchcock movies or survival movies, Lifeboat, or I watched Plane. That's one where a plane crashes, and of course there's going to be fighting over one person is going to try to take more resources from the group than they can. And there's going to be a leader in charge who has to make sure and enforce that the other doesn't take more water than is their ration, and so on. So all of these kind of fundamental dynamics built in. But then there's also superior and inferior Wa, and really looking at the upper and lower class, how there's a sort of a caste system built in to the program. And all of these questions, like for anyone who's watched the TV show Succession, great show, by the way, that has a lot to do with Wa. It also has to do with Penta. In some sense, it's the battle between Penta and Wa, the dysfunction of the family confronted with the questions of caste and upper class and lower class, and the haves and the have-nots, the wealthy and the not so wealthy. And so, yeah, it really is an interesting confrontation of both Penta and Wa. It's like family dysfunction shown behind the veneer of upper Wa facade.
Mhm.
So Casey comments, alpha projectors can lead the Wa, according to Richard Rudd.
Oh, I was gonna share so before I knew about Wa, remember I had that dream
That
as an alpha projector. I had after it was just a night of very numinous dreaming. The first night I spent in this house, the final act of a whole apparently hours long night of dreaming was being taken into this room where this guy said, welcome my 14 esteemed guests, he said. And so it was me, him, and 14 esteemed guests. And he said, together we will we have this magical device. And that's how it was termed to me. He called it a dragonfly, this Wa, but he said it was a device or a technology or a magical device, he said. So and obviously, Wa is not a being, it's a thing that you can do or whatever.
Well, and you showed me that. I mean, you drew it out. It was, you called it a dragonfly.
Yeah, because it looks kind of like a dragonfly, or kind of how the Wa is represented.
Yeah,
it's got wings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even non-human design referred to like a large group as a hive mind. So it's something about
Right.
But it was
winged insect and
they were arranged parallel to each other. Different than the way the Wa is represented in human design a bit, but still. And it's just funny, because it was exactly 16 people, and I didn't know about the Wa, and here Casey's saying this alpha projector thing. It is just kind of funny. Maybe we should manufacture a Wa sometime, see what happens. Imprint on the Maya.
so it's self-projected channels plus 5125 can lead a Wa.
She said alpha projector is what she was talking about.
Okay.
But I think this would be a little too technical to go more deep into the nuance of
Yeah.
Wa. We should save that for a day when we actually are looking at the channels of the Wa and what the roles of those channels are. So for instance, 4521. No, I mean, we'll talk about like 4521 being the classic tribal elder, and we'll talk about so we can talk about the different. I mean, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of detail there that would be fun to dig into, but I think it's a little late in the game today to start too much of the detail of Wa. But yeah, it is definitely an interesting aspect of understanding the difference between when you are in small group settings. There's alone, there's one-on-one, there's single penta, there's multi-penta, which is kind of competitive setting. And then there's Wa, and the Wa being an organizational structure for pentas to compete on one hand, but also where you start to have these emergent qualities of the Wa, like, as I mentioned, traditionally, I mean, people would come together in a Wa for mating rituals and things like that. So it's not that different from, I see I'm off camera here, and so is Johnny. He's been laughing in the back. He liked mating rituals.
Yeah. Wah, wah, wah.
Oh, that's him going wah, wah. Okay, great. All right, well, any comments, ideas, anything people want to talk about? I know that we went kind of from the wheel into some other areas.
Well, so in the dream, they said that what the device does was that it creates something to exist there in the Maya, basically. It might have even used the word Maya in the dream because I had heard Maya already. And if you think about it, you always talk about the Wa as a like the basic number of people that's needed to whatever procreate or keep humanity going. You need 16 people. And I associate that with this idea of totems, right? This ancient anthropological idea that you have 16 people together, you have a culture. So here is a culture. And this idea of like different classes being able to channel a different culture or whatever through the Wa. It's like the Wa can like, no, because it's like no one decides to be the frog people, right? No one picks it out. The frog represents itself, it offers itself, and then those people are the frog people or whatever, you know.
No, I love talking about Wa because it does immediately make me kind of go to a different place in what I think about, a place of totem and taboo and a place of early cultural development. And even the question of what is the minimum number of people needed? What is the minimum gene pool to repopulate the earth?
Right. Oh,
Th-
yeah.
There was that great news story you found on Zeitgeist the other day, or someone found, which was about the rabbits. Did you see that one? I might have queued it up, but not sent it to you. So it was that a man released 24 rabbits in the Australian outback in like the 1850s, and
Right.
now there's like 10 billion rabbits or something. And it was just this great idea of just like releasing like such a small number of something, and that has just grown to be completely, everywhere. And that's what it's like with humans, where I don't know the exact number, if it's 88 people or if it's 68 people, something like that. It's actually something Ra talks about. He was fascinated by genetics and by the minimum gene pool. And I believe it is a multiple of Wa. It's like 5 Was. So what would that be? That would be, like 90 people or something, or 88 people. So something like that, where I guess 75, but if you say 81 people, I don't know. But it's like what is the minimum number of distinct genetic material that you need to repopulate and not have birth defects and not have too much intermarriage of cousins and things like that. So yeah. Well, interesting stuff. Really, really good. I am loving this new season. I have to say, it does feel like the season shifted, and I felt it. I mean, with the time shifting and just duality's been really nice. It was a really warm, fuzzy duality, but now is also just like it changed. There is a change now, and it is interesting. I mean, I am less concerned. I guess I haven't really seen what my newest concerns will be, because it feels more like my previous concerns were just cleared off, and now I have to wait for the new concerns to emerge. But I like concerns changing. It's easy to get stuck on what we're concerned about. It's easy to get stuck on our worries and stuck on our fears and stuck on, well, geez, we just went through such a time of fear. And so it does feel like a creatively fertile time, and a time of, well, we've taken care of all the stuff we had to take care of. So now we get to turn inward and look to other matters.
Look to ourselves instead of the other.
I guess, yeah. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying this newfound. It's a real breath of fresh air. I mean, I guess each quarter kind of feels that way. It's like civilization is so busy. Then you get to duality. It's like, we can sit on the porch and have these long summer afternoons of just hanging out and laughing and talking. And then we get through duality, and it's like, now I can finally get to my own creative efforts. Like, I'm going to play some music or make a song or do my own thing. Right. Then we get to the end of that, and I guess we really get to the envisioning, which is in initiation, which is so much about what the mind imagines it could build.
Right. Looking forward towards the world again, after being now having this respite from the world.
All right. Anything anyone wants to talk about? How you guys been doing? I know this was quite a intellectual exercise in moving around a lot of different concepts. Anyone like to communicate remotely? Thank you, Lisita. I see your smiles there. I saw your comment earlier, Ricky, that you're loving it, so I'll take that as a good sign that these kinds of philosophical speculations are appreciated. Thank you for listening in, Nancy, and yeah, Casey says have fun. Okay, well, we can wrap up unless anyone has anything else pertinent, anything they're thinking about.
I'm curious what people's, I mean, you don't have to go into this, but people's design sun corridor.
Oh, okay. You're asking, so
I don't know.
right, so the question from Ashley was people's design sun quarter as opposed to your personality sun quarter. Now, being 88 degrees, it seems like the vast majority of people, that's just going to be,
The opposite.
no, it's going to be the previous.
The previous,
It'll be the
right.
previous one. But because it's 88 and not 90, there is going to be a very small number of people for whom their design sun quarter is the same as their personality sun quarter, right?
It would be 4 ways people, the
Yeah.
transpersonal profiles that correspond to the 4 ways.
Just a couple days ago, the 44.5 and the 44.6 people,
Right.
they would theoretically have a design sun that is the first or second line, right? 5-1s, 5-2s, 6-2s, and 6-3s, or even a third line, I guess. That is in gate 7.
Right.
So they're going to be the fully duality people, right? They're going to have full duality, whereas everybody else in that quarter with personality sun duality, like myself, is going to have a design sun in civilization. And so everybody in mutation is going to have a design sun in duality, except for the last 2 days, roughly, of that. So that's a really interesting point.
Building.
Yeah, civilization. Yeah, it's building. It's being in the Maya. It's purpose fulfilled through, what is it? Purpose. How would we call it? Purpose fulfilled through form.
Society.
Exactly. Society in some ways, yeah, but yeah, purpose fulfilled through form. So building a business, running a business, doing things, building things in the Maya, and so on. No, that's a really interesting point. That very few people are actually going to have design suns from a different quarter than their personality sun. So, well, thank you for that, Ashley. And yeah, maybe if anyone else has anything else they want to talk about, you can always message me. We can put it on the list for next week. It seems like we should talk about WA at some point. I don't know if that'll be next week or another time. That might take a little more prep work. But anything
Someday.
Yeah. Happy mutation, everyone.
Happy mutation.
All right. Really good seeing you all. And yeah, anything you want to be covered in the future, just shoot me a message and looking forward to it. Thank you.